Okay, so I welcome everybody to the last session of this conference, and there will be three lectures, 1 hour lecture and half an hour discussion, and a short break in this session. The first speaker is Probal Kumar Maiti from Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore, and he will be talking about understanding HIV invasion mechanism and designing efficient inhibitor through computational techniques. So any question you have, please raise your hand or type it in the chat box. Probal doesn't mind taking question in the middle of the talk or at the end of the talk. So feel free to ask questions. So with this, I would like to request Probal to start the presentation.
Let me see, let me make it full screen. Okay, thanks Sakuntala for the introduction and good afternoon everybody. Yeah, it's a nice meeting. I'm attending several excellent talks and hope all of you are also enjoying. So what I'm going to tell you in next 1 hour is something what we are doing for almost last 7-8 years. And it's a very complicated problem. So I'll go very slowly and you'll see that it's just some of the understanding we have, but it's a long way to go. So before I start, I thought first let me acknowledge my co-workers. So the first part of the talk, what I'll talk about is done by Biswajit, excellent postdoc who just left last month to join another postdoc, along with my student Anil, who is also now a postdoc, and another student Suman, who did the early work, the postdoc in London. Bidisa did the first work. She was a postdoc. Sutto was another postdoc who did a lot of, he's a crystallographer. So you'll see that his contribution where it was useful. And I had very enjoyable and continue to have very enjoyable collaboration with Naren in the whole last several years and recently with Anand also. And these are several funding and this huge computational effort, as you'll see. And so in the, if Cray from our CRC at IISc and this thematic unit actually was not there, many of the simulations would not have been achieved. Okay, let me start now. So what I'm going to give you a rather broad introduction to the problem. What is the issue here, the way I understand. So here is the cartoon of which we put in one of our recently published work, cartoon of a morphology of the HIV virion. And you see it's a very complicated object and many of these parts which are shown in different colors, some of them are understood, meaning their structures are available and many of them are not available. And that's why this makes it very challenging to do a very, very thorough computational study. So this HIV viral, it actually invades the human T cells and destroy the defense mechanism. And what is important here is this, the two RNA strands inside this, along with the protease and integrase, they actually are encapsulated or encased in what is called this P24 proteins. And the core capsid is subsequently surrounded by the P17 protein matrix, and then the outer level membrane. And on the outer membrane, you see these spikes-like features. This is a features for this virus. In fact, SARS-CoV also has similar spike-like features. So we'll see that these spikes actually make a important contribution in this whole invasion mechanism. So then the next question would be that how do we understand this and what are the structure of this? So here is again a cartoon of this. So I'm showing you a schematic of these spikes now. So here you can see this is what I was showing in the previous slide. So I take a zoom through this. And this is what it is in. And remind you that many of these are artistic impression. Some of them are structurally solved, but a majority of them are structurally yet unresolved. So here you see that each of these spike, they have this trimeric form. One of these is called GP120. This is a protein. They stay in a trimeric form. And then this GP41 is another transmembrane glycoprotein, which again has an important contribution in the invasion mechanism. So this is GP120 and this is GP41. And till several years back, a GP120 structure fully was not known. And now only very recently, a structure is fully resolved. When we started way back in 2012-13, the structure was not known, particularly this V3 loop here, which is very functional and which is kind of believed to be one of the key portion of the protein which enables this virus to attack the human cell. That structure was not clearly known. And then here, let me get my pointer. How do I get pointer? Yeah, okay. So here is the V3 loop I was mentioning. And then there is this V1, V2 loops also. They have also a lot of functionality. Here I am showing you something called CD4. CD4 is a human T cell membrane receptor. So these are the believed to be sites where CD4 can bind. So again, to remind you now that these are the binding sites where the T cell membrane receptor can bind. So that means that if we want to inhibit this inversion, one target area is to actually inhibit this binding, that CD4 does not bind here. So remember this, that at a later stage, I will actually show you how this binding happens. This is a complex binding and what is our strategy which can actually inhibit this binding. Other mechanism, as I'm mentioning, that GP41. So here I'm showing that these are, so when the big pharma are producing or targeting drug development, they actually have several level of target. So for example, one drug development is specifically focused where this CD4 binding they try to inhibit. And then there are other, these are in other circle that where this GP41 also can be targeted. So now what I'm going to show you that what is this mechanism what I was trying and what is the known mechanism or the people believe that what exactly way this inversion is happening. So here is again, as I mentioned that many things are known, just putting together several experiments over years, people come up with these hypotheses and then one can gradually go and test each of these hypotheses. So here is the current understanding. So here is the T cell membrane and here is this one of the GP120 with spikes I was showing you in the previous. So as I mentioning that this receptor CD4, it binds, so as the virus enters, it binds, it's believed to bind to this CD4 receptor. And as soon as and here is another membrane receptors, CCR5, which has very important role, but this structure is unresolved yet. So not much work or not much known about this CCR5 functionality yet. So CD4, as soon as it binds, then it undergoes, the GP120 undergoes a large conformational change. In fact, exactly what conformational change, I'll come back, some experiment have been done to understand. So with that large conformational change, it triggers its binding to CCR5. You can see that these things, when it binds, there is a lot of conformational changes happen in this trimeric unit. And then that conformational change has triggers its binding to the CCR5, another membrane co-receptor. Now, as soon as this binding happens, then what happens? Then it's believed that this GP41, which I was showing you in earlier here, so this GP41 comes into a big role and they can aid the fusion and between the human cell and the virus cell, and that's where someone gets infected with the HIV. So you see that several points here, that the first binding to CD4, so one can actually try to understand this binding, how exactly this binding happens, so that one can design something or plan something to inhibit this binding at the first place. If that fails, the second level of target for the understanding or for the drug design would be to inhibit this subsequent binding to the CCR5. So then the next target or the drug target would be to actually inhibit this binding to the CCR5. If this also fails, then the next level of target would be to inhibit this fusion, which actually eventually is allowing this inversion, where you can see that GP41 plays an important role. So what we have done over the last 7 years, we have tried to understand each of these process, not the CCR5 yet, it's yet to be structure yet to be known, but this one here, the binding to the CD4 and how to inhibit that. And this inversion here, this fusion, how exactly GP41 is aiding that and how to actually control that. These are the story I would like to tell you in next half an hour or 40 minutes. So here is one of the very early, very nice experiment, and this was made possible with advent of cryo-EM from Sriram Subramaniam, who was in NIH that time at USA. Now he has moved to Canada somewhere. So this experiment clearly kind of demonstrated this conformational transition or conformational transition to the binding of CD4 and subsequent MCO very clearly. So here I'll, without going to the details, I just from all of their cryo-EM image and electron density map. So they actually clearly showed this conformational transition. So here you can see that these are the GP120 trimeric form, and here is the CD4 binding site, and these are GP41. So here you see that as soon as CD4 binds, these are the membrane, T cell membrane is somewhere here, and these are the receptor of the T cell membrane. And these binding trigger this such a huge conformational change you can see in this GP120. And so this is what was experimentally confirmed in 2008. And with that confirmed change, then it can actually do subsequent attack or subsequent other binding to CCR5 or the fusion, what I told you in the last slide. So subsequently, I'll show you that. So this was just a demonstration that this conformation change happens, but exactly what conformation, which residues are responsible, those molecular level details was not known. So which we tried to basically identify through computation, which I'll come back to you. So then once this conformational change has happened and it has bound to CCR5, then I told you that the next level of inversion will happen through the fusion, where the GP41, another membrane protein from the virus, comes into picture. Let's see. So once that happens, then again, not much is known. So there are again two hypotheses here. So it's believed that either it can happen this fusion or the entry of the virus, this virion, to the T cell can happen either through what is called endocytosis pathway, which is schematically shown here. So here is this virion, what I've shown you, and this is the binding to the CD4, and then its binding then can cause what is called endocytosis, and through this endocytosis, it can actually enter through the to the cell, human cell, and then in the human cell, the lipid, the two vesicles can fuse, and with that fuse, you remember that the interior, that RNA, which is the main function of the virus, they can mix, and then the infection starts. So this is one hypothesis, that it can happen through this endocytosis. The other hypothesis that it can happen what is called the fusion pathway. So let me tell you a little detail here. So this one again schematically I have mentioned earlier. So this is the GP41, and you can see that the GP41 again schematically shown here. And I again remind you that GP41 is not, the structure is not fully known. And here what I'm showing you the different possibilities. So here you can see this is what is called a pre-hairpin or intermediate state, where they are in this conformation. And then in the post-hairpin or the fusion stage, what happens that they have this large conformational change, and they form this kind of a barrel or the bundle structure. You can see that this N-terminal, C-terminal, they make a 6-helix bundle. And with this bundle formation, the human cell, the T cell and the virus membrane or vesicle, they actually come together and they eventually make a fusion state here. So these two are the hypotheses, and we'll see that which one is the going away. We don't know yet, but we'll try to see if this is what a possibility. Now to try that, as you can see that we need to know what is the structure of this GP41. And as I mentioned that this is not known, only very recently. So before I go to the structure of the GP41 in detail, let me tell you again the same thing. What are the different functional part of this GP41? So here I am showing you the same GP41 as in earlier slides. So here is what is the host cell, the human cell, and this part is also the fusion peptide, and this is what is binding to this host cell. And then there is this N-terminal, and then followed by this loop, and then this C part, repeat part, and this M part, and here is the transmembrane domain for the virus. And here I am showing you the sequence of these GP41. So now with this information, the question is that can we build a working model of this GP41, which can subsequently help me or help us to study if something of this sort is happening. So only very recently, part of the GP41 structure was resolved, very recent paper here. So here you can see that this is only this part of the, so they have tried to resolve only this part of the GP41, but other part, fully functional, full conformation is not known. So what we'll do, we like to model this and then simulate that structure using computational technique, MD simulation in particular. So that's the first objective, what we are going to do at first results. Now to do that, what we'll be using molecular dynamics simulation, and several people have given very excellent introduction to the simulation technique, but I thought for the sake of completeness, just quickly tell you in 2 slides. So basically to do a molecular dynamics or any simulation, you need a model, correct? So, and here I'm specifically talking about model of GP41 to begin with. Then we'll see if I can get a model of GP120, etc. So once you have that model, so this model can be a crystal structure, cryo-EM structure, NMR structure, if we are lucky, if they're available. If they are not in many of these cases, then you have to design it with the sequence and other available information. Once you have that model nothing but give you the 3D coordinates or the coordinates in 3D space. With that, actually, you can do a molecular dynamics, nothing but solving the equation of motion, where you need to have information about the interatomic forces. And that's where another complexity. The first complexity is the model, and second complexity, how do you compute these forces, etc. And that's where quantum mechanics enters. And if you remember Helmut talks, he nicely summarized how exactly quantum mechanically those can be obtained. So once you have the forces and the 3D coordinates, you can do a so I have to go out of this. How do I with this? No, I cannot play. How do I? Does it play? So with that, you can see that with the forces, you can evolve the time evolution of the trajectory or how the particles moving in time and space. So this is what is a simple molecular dynamics simulation. And the forces I was talking about, this is a molecular system. So there are many complicated interactions. So it can have Mond stretching, angle bending, torsional, inversion. And then if it is charged particle, in most cases, they're highly charged object. So you have a Coulombic interaction, and there are van der Waals dispersive interaction. So you have to have a nice force field to describe all of these potential and from their potential forces. And once you have these forces, you can actually calculate or solve this equation of motion to time evolve their trajectory. With that, a brief introduction to MD. So next I come immediately to a model building. So before I do the MD simulation of this, I need a model, as I mentioned. And as I mentioned, that GP41 structure is not yet available. Only bits of pieces are available. So we do, Biswajit, who had a very strong expertise in bioinformatics, and Satyabrata, who was a crystallographer. So they actually went through the literature, all the sequence similarity from various classes, and then came back with different templates. So these are more technical, so I'll not go through all these. So with that, basically with this, so they came up with a nice model. And when I say nice, I'll validate my statement in next few slides. So as I mentioned, you see that if you go back to again here, that this in this process, you see that GP41 in this what is called a pre-fusion. So here it's a so it's an intermediate or pre-fusion state in this conformer, and in the post-fusion, you see they are in this conformation. And so we actually try to build, because in the computation, if we like to see this transition, it will be a nightmare at the time scale involved in this. So we actually try to build both the structure in our model building to begin with. So here, what we build is a pre-fusion, what we believe, extended or PRA, we say pre-fusion complex. And then here is another 6-helix bundle. As you saw that in the fusion state, they form this 6-helix bundle. So we build this post-fusion conformer. So these are our, after a lot of struggle, we could build these two model of GP41 in a pre-fusion complex and in a post-fusion conformer. So now next question is that, do we believe this structure? How do we validate this structure in the absence of their cryo-EM or crystal structures? So here, as I mentioned, that these are some of the largest simulation. People who does MD simulation can see appreciate the complexity of, as I say, almost 2 million atom system simulation. So it's really very large scale simulation. So when we do simulate this two conformer, the pre-fusion and post-fusion complex, and we plot their kind of contour plot their free energy landscape. So this is for the post-fusion complex and the pre-fusion complex. So you can see the post-fusion complex, they're actually quite stable. They remain in this such a nice minimum and free energy the states. And the pre-fusion complex, you see, there is no preferred conformer. So they actually go back and forth between many different conformers. So just to demonstrate that the post-fusion complex is a stable conformer, so could be a correct conformer as may be seen in the experiment. So here I am showing you the same. So if you start from a pre-fusion complex over simulation, here we did such a large system, 100 nanosecond simulation. You can see eventually they try to adopt this post-fusion complex around 90 or 100 nanosecond, trying to adopt that 6 helix bundle kind of conformer. So that is one way of arguing that probably these are correct conformer. They are transitioning from pre-fusion to the post-fusion conformer. Another route we took, some experiment where they have calculated the experimentally the sum of the peptide inhibitor. Again, these are the terminology of these 3 peptide inhibitor for this this GP41 inhibition, C34, C37, and T20. And from these experiments, they have what is called IC50 values, which is nothing but it tells you that minimum amount of this inhibitor which can inhibit some biological action. So lower the IC50 value, better the inhibition action. So we actually go ahead and took these inhibitors and calculate their binding affinity through this GP41 and rank them. So here I am showing you so this is the peptide, different 3 peptides and their binding affinity. And here I am showing you their binding free energy for these 3 inhibitors, which is experimental known. Experimental known, not the free energy, but their IC50 values, which tells you their efficacy. So lower the IC50, they are better inhibitor. So we correlate that with the better binding free energy. So you can see that using the IC50 value, we actually get the experimental trend. So this is the experimental paper some years back. And we actually reproduce the experimental trend that these 3 peptide inhibitor binding to this part of GP41 gives the binding energy which correlates well with the available IC50 values. So these two validation, the correlation with the IC50 experimental and the conformer changing from the pre-fusion to the post-fusion complex with the free energy landscape kind of gives us a confidence that probably this is a good starting structure to start the next step, meaning to see how the fusion works. Any question, comments so far? So here is a busy slide again, not very interesting for most of you, but this is very interesting for experimentalists. So what I am showing you, the another validation that from our this free energy calculation, which you are trying to correlate to the IC50 values, we actually went ahead because we have the now luxury that residue by residue, which one residue interacting with this peptide more and less. So we can actually look at those and try to see actually which are the higher binding between this inhibitor and the GP41 residue. And it turns out that binding energy for this tryptophan and isoleucine, these are the numbering, and they have the highest binding energy, which again correlates well with another set of experiment which was done on similar system some years back. So again, telling that the model we built is possibly a good starting point. See, all these difficulty would not have been there if you had a nice crystal or cryom structure for the GP41 to begin with. In the absence of that, you have to do all level of validation when you build the structures. So then with this structure, we go to the next study. Now I would like to see how this fusion occurs. So the key questions here, what are the key questions experiment would like to know? So how many GP41, remember that GP41, they stay in a trimeric from like GP120. So key question in the field is that how many GP41 are required for this fusion to occur. Then that will determine when you design your inhibitor, you have to appropriately design that way that this many GP41 will be there. Then the second question is that how do they actually initiate the lipid mixing when this fusion happens? And then is there any associated free energy barrier for this mixing? Because that will allow us, if we know the free energy barrier, that will allow us to design inhibitor so that that free energy is not overcome, so that that they don't mix actually, because as soon as the lipid mixing happens, then this inversion can happen. And then of course, how important are the lipid composition to membrane fusions? Now this question, what I now want to address, is a computationally very challenging and nightmare. In fact, we cannot do at all atom simulation here every atoms are represented in their atomic glory. So we go to a coarse-grained description. Again, this was adequately described by Professor Chui in his talk, and I think briefly mentioned by Helmut also. So here is a brief one slide presentation, what is a very popular coarse-grained representation of the protein, where it's a 4:1 mating. 4 heavy atoms is lumped to one single atom, and that way you reduce the degrees of number of atoms or degrees of freedom 4-fold. So it's a huge computational saving if we go from this 4:1 mapping and what is called all this Martini mapping. So details are here. I mean, there are adequate literature. I can discuss if some more questions on this Martini mapping. So with that, so that is what the protein mapping. Similarly, we can map we need to model the T cell, and we need to also model the virion membrane, as I have shown in the first few slides. So another important thing is the composition of this, the T cell membrane and the virion membrane. So in the literature, there are recent study which actually more or less map the major ingredient in this both human membrane and also virion membrane. So here I am showing you the composition. So you can see that in either in the human membrane or in the virion membrane, there is a huge variety of lipids and cholesterol, and in certain ratio. And why I am emphasizing, I'll show you later, that if you don't have this fine composition, what is here, you may not see many of the features I'm going to talk about. So that is another control simulation or experiment. I'll show you that why this specific composition, and that was one of the questions I posed. So what are the specific composition which will aid in this fusion? So here I am showing you the composition of the human T cell membrane and the virion membrane or vesicles. So again, you can see that this is a very large system, and simulating for microscope, because we would like to see this fusion process. So it requires a long time scale simulation. That's why we are doing a coarse-grained MD simulation. Here is one of the control simulation. So I have a human vesicles, I have HI vesicles, and you can see I have taken within the computational limitation, I take a 20 nanometer diameter vesicles. And over simulation, so these are, I'm not showing you, they are in a water bath and a periodic box. I'm not showing you for clarity. And over microsecond simulation, these two vesicles, they have no affinity to binding, leave alone any fusion. Similarly, if I generate a human bilayer and a HI vesicles, again, if I simulate for longer time, you see there is no binding and no fusion, anything. So you see that in the absence of, and so why it is that actually the barrier for this fusion is quite high. It's actually several hundreds of cavities, 40 to say 100 cavity, depending on the composition and environment. So the take-home message is that no fusion or lipid mixing if you don't have the GP41, what I described earlier. So now we come to this, then what happens if GP41 is present, and how many GP41 is required if there is a fusion. So we do a series of computational experiment. So here, for example, we have one GP41, and you can see that now the virus, the virion, the HIV vesicles, they are binding to the human T cell membrane. If I have a 2 GP41, you can see similar binding after 10 microsecond simulation. As soon as you have 3 GP41, you see actually something different happening, and I will quantify and I'll show you more details about what exactly. So there is a stalk formation happening, which is a precursor to the fusion and lipid mixing. And then once you have 4 GP41, then actually the stalk initiation is very, very quick, and the lipid mixing is very quick. So what we are showing that no GP41, they don't work or they don't fuse, but as soon as we have 3 GP41 or at least more than 2 within the simulation error bar, more than 2 GP41, then you start seeing the initiation of stalk formation and eventual lipid mixing. So that means the initiation of fusion process. Here I am just quantifying it. So here I am showing you the number of contacts between the human bilayer and the HIV, the lipid-lipid contacts. And what I am plotting, so here you see that no GP41 or single GP41 or 2 GP41, they are all buried here. There is no contact. Okay, so here over 10 microsecond time scale. But as soon as you have 3GP41 or 4GP41, as you can see that the lipid contact between the human cell and the HIV vesicles, they start mixing, and that's why the number of their lipid contacts increases, and as you can see. So now this one, once we have this simulation in hand, we can actually go back to the simulation and study the whole process in great detail, give more really microscopic picture, and these are some of the beautiful results. So what I'm showing you here, this 3GP41 case and 4GP41 case. Remember at the bottom, I'm showing you the membrane, and these are if you remember from my previous slide, the GP41 fusion peptide and transmembrane domain, they have come together. They are now in the 6 bundle form, and so I'm representing the center of mass of that with these spheres. So what you can see that around 2 microseconds, these three comes together, and as soon as they come together, the stalk formation happens and lipid mixing happens. And you can see here, this I am plotting the inter distance between these pairs here for the 3 cases, and you can see they came together, and as soon as they come together, as I'll show you, that's where if you go back to this plot here, and that's the point there, the lipid mixing or the atomic contact start happening between the human T cell and the virus vesicles. And as soon as that happens, again they go further apart. And that's where they are actually escalate further proliferation for another stalk formation. So that's the way. So this is a very concerted movement of these GP41. You can see it. Same thing you can see from here for the 4GP41 case. Again, you can see this here. They come together, again live together, and at this point, in this case, this happened around 1.5 microsecond. And at this point, again, you can see that this is where the lipid mixing start happening. So here also I'm showing you this distance between them, just to demonstrate that how mobile they are and how they come closer to initiate this, and they move apart to start escalate this proliferation in a different places. So same thing I am showing you in a more contact map, and contact map picture. Again, it is showing the same picture, so I'll skip this. So now during this, many things, interesting things happen to the bilayer. So here particularly I am showing you what is called a lipid tail distribution. So here this is an initial condition where there is no stalk formation or nothing, okay? And this is where when they have stalk or the lipid may start happening, you can see that the bilayer, so this tilde angle is defined here with the bilayer normal, and you can see that the lipid tilde angle when they do stalk formation, and this is what is expected when they stalk happen, the tilde angle will show such large angle, and this is what we can see. And so this is the pre-stalk, so showing you the pre-stalk dimple, that this is the initiation phase when the stalk formation about to happen, just to show a pictorial mode that how the stalk formation can happen. I'll first show you the movie and then come back. I thought the movie. So here I am showing you the movie, this the formation, and come back. So this is, I'm not showing you the GP41, this is a 4GP41 case. For clarity, I have removed the GP41 and the water molecule from here. And you will see how exactly, so for clarity, I have removed, displaced the two things little far apart so that you can see the lipid mixing and stalk formation. So you can see here, this is a human bilayer, the stalk formation happened, and then lipids start mixing here, okay? And here is the HIV vesicles, and as you can see that here, this is what again, so you can see that these lipids will mixing here. And I am showing you here in a different color code, the different component of the membrane, which one is more mobile or more responsible during the stalk formation and this fusion, subsequent fusion. So this is happening over 10 microsecond time scale. Yeah, so you can see that, so this I have displaced, this is actually here, and the GP41 here, and you see that the human bilayer lipids have mixed with the lipid here with the HIV vesicle, and that's where the inversion has happened. So I go back. Yeah, so apart from this, the lipid tilde angle, another very important thing is the splay angle also. Splay, when I say splay angle, here is the lipids, the beta-running lipid, there are two tails, and you can define the splay angle. And you can see that depending on the lipids which are splaying more than the others, And you remember that this black one is just in the bulk. So the splay is very, what I call the distribution is not there. There are not much splay. But as soon as the stock formation and the mixing is happening, the splay play a big role. And you can see that distribution for most of the lipid and for variety of case, 3 GP41 versus 4 GP41. I'm just showing you the splay distribution that they really proliferate everywhere. Another very important message or important outcome of this study is the lower rate of lipid transfer of lipid from vesicle to human cell. So it turns out that the virus is much more stable than the host cell. So this is a very interesting finding from our study, and you might have noticed from the movie also that the more lipid were getting transferred from the human cell to the virus, in contrast to the lipid from the virus cell to the human T cell. So this is another very interesting finding, and we are yet to find the physical or the drug design implication of this finding, but this is another very interesting finding from our study. Another important thing, again, because we have this long microsecond long trajectory, we can actually go back and see that what are the other positive effects for this lipid transfer and subsequent fusion. So a known thing is this flip-flop of the cholesterol. So here I am showing you, this is the initial, this is the one of the cholesterol here, and you see how they flip-flop. So they have changes their orientation, and this is a flip-flop. And this is what I'm showing, that the human bilayer, the flip-flop of this cholesterol is much higher than in the HIV, and this is kind of correlating well with the other observation that the human cell, the lipid mixing transfer is much higher than the HIV vesicles. This was another control I was earlier mentioning, that this whole thing, what I have just now shown you over microsecond long simulation, the stock formation and the lipid mixing. This does not happen if the lipid composition, what I have showed you, the very fine composition, if it is different than that composition. So with any arbitrary composition, if you do even with the this number of GP41, they don't make any stocks or there is no lipid mixing. So this is just to highlight that the lipid composition is very crucial to study the fusion or the stock formation and the lipid mixing. This is another very detailed. I'll skip this. Then one important being a physicist, we wanted to ask: is there any the free energy barrier for the stock formation? So is there any? So what we did this simulation with the 4 GP41 at different temperature. And from that calculation, we see the initiation time of the stock formation, and we do a Arrhenius fitting for that time scale. And here is a nice Arrhenius fitting within the error bar of the data. And what it gives is kind of a barrier for this formation, which comes around 10 to 12 kVt. It's in a 6 kcal per mole, or if you like kVt, it's around 10 to 12 kVt. So here what we are proposing a kind of a free energy landscape for the stock initiation and then subsequent thing. So what we believe that, so you see that we did not see complete fusion process as of yet, either due to the time scale involved or the limitation of the model. So what we believe that we have seen this process with the stock formation and the subsequent lipid mixing. And then these are probably other processes which are there and which probably we have not yet been able to explore in this way. So from within the simulation, what we believe that the free energy barrier has substantially come down. So as I mentioned, that if it is there is no GP41, the fusion barrier for two vesicles to bilayer will be around 40 to 60 kVt, and here that is lower fourfold to 10 to 12 kVt.
Well, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah, please.
It's a question from Nihal Mathur, and the question is, what is the relation between simulation timescales and natural timescales?
These are natural timescale. This is really what you will measure in the lab timescale. So these, when I say microsecond, this is a lab, the natural timescale, same. The timescale is same, you can put it. That's the beauty of this all atom MD simulation or coarse grain MD simulation. You can, they are one-to-one. So the timescale is same as you will do in a lab scale. Does that answer your question? Okay. So here is the summary. There is the summary of, yeah, Shakuntala?
Yes. He says yes. So I think the answer is clear.
Okay. So here is the summary that that if you don't have any GP41, then there is no fusion or the lipid mixing, so inversion cannot happen. And because the free energy barrier for this process is very high, as I mentioning in this range. As soon as you have more than 2 GP41, as I showed you in our calculation, then they can form stock and subsequent lipid mixing. And this is happening because the free energy barrier come down almost fourfold, which is around 10 to 12 kVt. So this is the summary and the demonstration that show that how many GP41 is responsible, what is the barrier, and how does the lipid mixing happens. So this movie I have showed you earlier. So is there any questions on this part? Then I will move to the next part of the talk. So here to summarize that what we have done so far, we have been able to generate a working model of this GP41, which is part of the HIV virion, whose crystal structure or chiome structure is not yet known. We have built a model and we have shown that the model is quite accurate in terms of several experimental data. And then we use that model to demonstrate that that can actually initiate human cell and the HIV cell in fusion and lipid mixing. Okay, so if there are no questions, then I go to the next part. So you remember that initially I was talking that this happens at a later stage, but the first contribution is the binding of CD4 to GP120. So that is another target, that if you can actually stop that binding, then this fusion will not happen because they won't be in contact. So can we actually understand now GP120 and CD4 binding and understand their binding free energy and design inhibitor? So let's see. Again, here are the motivation for this, and this was the first work we did many years back when GP120 structure again were not known. Now the structure is fully known. So what I'm going to do, so this I have already shown that these are the CD4 binding site, and that causes this very, very large conformation. So we'll try to detect in our simulation what are these conformational change. And then I like to talk about some other very nice experiment from Peter Kong group at NIH. So they are trying to map the free energy landscape of this binding. So they do single molecule experiments. So what they do, they bring a cantilever and pull this. So here is the CD4 and CCR5 in the T cell, and this is the GP120. So GP120 is bound to CD4, and either it can be in complex with CCR5 or no CCR5. They have done the both experiment. So then they pull this at different rates and they calculate the loading rate dependence of this binding. So this is something you might remember from Helmut talks. He was showing you the bond rupture of this and showing you the loading rate versus rupture force. And here is the result from the experiment. So rupture force versus loading rate. Now, one thing I would like many of you to notice that in Helmut's talk, this rupture force versus loading rate was a monotonic dependence. So as you are increasing a loading rate, rupture force are monotonically increasing. This is really in contrast to that. So, and this is only as of now in literature we have found is the only example where you have this non-monotonic dependence. So it's a very complicated. So you can see that at a low loading rate, it has this behavior, and at higher loading rate, this has this behavior. So it seems that this binding, CD4 binding to GP120, has two different free energy landscape. That's why the rupture force has these two different variations. That means when drug makers or the companies, when they would like to design drugs to inhibit this, they should be aware of this, that they have this very, very different free energy landscape for this binding. And this is same. So here I'm writing that the bond breaking rupture forces can be divided into two regimes. And same thing. So this was without CCR5. They see similar thing when CCR5 is also present. They see very similar pattern like this. At low loading rate, one slope of the rupture force. At high loading rate, another slope for the rupture force. Okay. So these actually prompted them to schematically give such a cartoon of this free energy landscape, what I was talking, that they might be that when this binding is happening, there are kind of two barriers, that a linear barrier potential at high loading rate, and then that outer barrier potential at low loading rate. So what we are going to study now that actually you will see that if we can mimic such a loading rate dependence rupture for the GP120CD4, and if we find that, then we will actually go back and see that what are the conformational change which that Sriram Subramanian cryo-EM picture was alluding to or giving information. So we'll go back and then we'll try to see if we can actually stop this binding altogether. Okay. So problem again here, as I mentioned, that to do the simulation, you need a model of GP120 and CD4. And as I mentioned earlier, that when we started in 2012, there was no model. Crystal structure were not available fully. Part of these are available. So starting 2017 is not available. Now it's a more better situation. So when we started, this structure was not complete. So again, we'll do what is called the homology modeling, as I've described in the context of GP41. And then what I'm going to do, that we'll see actually what are the different loading rate dependence of this binding, and then we'll see if we can design an inhibitor. Okay. Here is the part of the structure which was available when we started in 2012. Okay, so here is the, so what is important that the V3 loop, which is very, very functional and which is believed to be a very, very important in this whole inversion mechanism, was missing here. So we again, here is this article in the 2017 in this Nature paper, they actually gave the full structure now. So this is available now. So we have planned actually to try again the same calculation with this known structure now. But let me go back to our previous study. So here, we build this structure, this V3 loop here, we build it using homology modeling. So here is the GP120 and here is the CD4. Okay. So what we are going to do, we are going to mimic now Peter Kang single molecule experiment. We will pull GP120 from CD4 and look at their rupture and their loading rate dependence. Again, these are very, very expensive calculations. So it took us quite a while to finish this. Before you do that, so that time, again, as I mentioned that once you do this modeling, you have to validate. At every step, you have to validate your model, that how good is it, whether it's worth using for further study. So for this, we are fortunate to have another experiment from this PNAS paper, where they actually calculated the binding free energy from the differential calorimetry experiment. So they reported a binding energy of GP120CD4 around 62 kcal per mole. And in our model, we actually reproduce something. So within error bar, they're more or less similar. So we thought that this is again a good working model. And here I'm showing you the superimposition of the part of the crystal structure which is available and our model. So they look very similar. So that's a very win-win situation. That is a good working model. Now I'll do this pooling as in the experiment. So you can see, so this is, so you remember that the CD4 is actually embedded, it's a transmembrane receptor in T cell, so that is fixed, and we'll be pulling GP120 to the cantilever like in experiment. Okay. Here, so I'm not showing for clarity the water ions it's in their environment. I'm just showing you the two subunits, the GP120 and CD4. So I'm pulling GP120, and you can see at some point these two will rupture, so they will be separated together. Is exactly the same. And notice this one is a loop, another loop which is actually the last one to rupture. So here, so now the rupture has happened. These two has been separated. Okay. Now we do several such pulling experiments. So here I'm showing you as I'm pulling, I'm calculating the force versus distance at different. These are the different pulling rate. So from tens of such runs, we can actually calculate from the force distance plot the critical rupture force, and then plot that for different rates. So here the rupture force, again you can see that it depends on the pulling rate. If you are pulling very fast, then the force required is very large, and for slow pulling, the fast, and if you are pulling slowly, then force required is low. Okay. So then what you can see from these, you can plot the rupture force versus loading rate. And within again simulation scattered, I remind you that these are very, very expensive calculations. We did not have the luxury to repeat them for many more samples. But within the error bar, we can see actually that there are these two regimes. So at low loading rate, there is one slope, and at high loading rate, there is one. So non-monotonic dependence as in experiment. So this is giving another confidence that the structure we built that time is actually quite good and can reproduce this experimental scenario. So at higher loading rate, rupture force linear with the loading rate, and a low loading rate is more or less weakly dependent, not much. Okay. So then once we have reproduced this experimental observation, then we can go back what experiment cannot detect. What are these residues which are responsible for this rupture, different behavior, and we can actually go back, identify those residues, and those residue admission is very critical for the vaccine design. Okay. So what is happening? So as you can see that a low loading rate is actually a new contacts. So I'm showing you the contacts between GP1 and the CD4. So as you can see that a low loading rate, new contacts are forming. And this one is actually, that's why slope loading rate bonds are strengthened initially, but they eventually dissociate. You can see that although they form this contact here, meaning they are more force required, but they dissociate much faster. In contrast, at higher loading rate, bonds they dissociate at a higher distance. Okay. So then we calculated the free energy also. So I'll just take home message is that a low loading rate, this new bond formation. Okay. And they dissociate faster. So this is a new kind of bonds which are not available in biological context, other bond adhesion context. So here we are showing you now the conformational change, what that serum superhuman cryo-EM was showing. So we are able to identify what conformational change is happening in GP120 and CD4 and which are the residues responsible. So we have identified through this RMSD calculation. So we wrote in our paper this line, despite the initial strengthening, you saw that new bonds formation was happening. So they say initially strengthened as new bond, meaning the energy is very strong there. The complex dissociate over smaller separation when loading rate is low. In other words, efficient dissociation here involved the crossing of a dynamic free energy barrier. You remember that the Peter Kong group, they are showing you two free energy barrier, depending on the two loading rate, due to formation of new intermolecular contacts upon the application of a gradual tensile force. This complex dissociation behavior was robust and was replaced with different initial. So we did multiple simulation initial condition, we reproduced this behavior. So these actually allow us to propose this, that this complex is very different from typical slip or catch bond. If you have seen the biological literature, they will be talking about slip or catch bonds, either it's strengthening or weakening. But here is actually is a combination of both. It behaves depending on the loading rate, it behaves either slip or catch bond. So this is very, very unique here. And I wanted to highlight this aspect. And why I'm highlighting, because this one is very crucial when one wants to design vaccine, they should have this information that they have this very, very dynamic free energy barrier so that the efficacy of the vaccine or drug should take care of that. So then I come to so now we have understood how exactly GP120 and CD4, they are binding, their dynamic free energy landscape, what is causing this initial strengthening and eventual weakening. So then it's known, it's a Star Pharma, now they have a gel, what is for antimicrobial, the Viva gel, and dendrimer is the active ingredient for that gel. And since I worked for last 10-15 years on this structure, so I had a natural tendency that to try this hypothesis and see what is causing the efficiency of this gel, which has active ingredient on this polymer. So this is hyperman's polymer, okay? And this is in the market. They actually had a clinical trial, I think phase 3 or phase 4 trial has happened some years back. So here is a cartoon of dendrimer. So this is a polymer which grows like a tree-like. That's why they are called dendrimer. And they are beautiful macromolecules and unique properties. And they are, of course, difficult to study because of the large molecular weight. So many years back, we put together actually a software which is publicly available and people use it worldwide, which basically can grow this polymer. Again, many physics students know that how to grow a polymer using a configuration bias Monte Carlo. So if you do a configuration bias Monte Carlo, you can grow this polymer at any generation or any molecular weight. So with this, actually, we build this polymer, what I was showing you, and a variant of this polymer, another polymer. So they are both known to be a good inhibitor for this GP120 CD4. Okay. So then we actually try to understand that how exactly this inhibition can happen. So here is the dendrimer. We dock it, and remember that I was telling you that after the CD4 binding happened, this binds to CCR5. So that means that if the dendrimer can actually not only prevent the GP120 CD4 binding, if it can block the CC4 binding site, that also is a good target. So here we actually see that the actual dendrimer can bind closely to the CCR5 binding site. Okay. So now what we'll do, we'll repeat the same experiment with in presence of dendrimer. And then what I'll do, I'll skip this and I'll show you this. So you can see that this blue curve, so I'm plotting the rupture force versus loading rate. This was in the absence of dendrimer, what I have shown you earlier. Now I am showing you in the presence of dendrimer. So you can see within the scatter of the data, in the presence of dendrimer, you can see that the rupture force has weakened. Meaning it has weakened. So rupture force is smaller in the presence of dendrimer. That means that this dendrimer actually destabilizing this binding. That it does not allow CD4 to be bound to the GP120, and that's the purpose, that we want to destabilize this binding. And that's what the way it's happening is, and we know what is the binding strength. So that's why we propose that this is the way that this dendrimer may inhibit the viral entry by weakening this GP120 CD4 binding. We did the same thing for another class of dendrimer, as SPL dendrimer. This is anionic. I did not mention that this is anionic dendrimer. In the native form, this is a highly negatively charged, and here it was a highly positively charged dendrimer. So in the SPL case also, we show the same thing. Again, I'm showing you the different dissociation process because of the time I'm going fast. So again here, so I show you that how exactly the SPL dendrimer again weakening this bond. So again, you can see that the binding in the SPL dendrimer weakening this GP120 CD4 binding. So both PAMM dendrimer, SPL dendrimer, the difference is the chemistry and their charge state. They can weaken this, and that way they can inhibit or the viral entry. Again, my time is short. We have identified key residues, and so we are talking to experimentalists who can actually do similar experiment and can mutate these residues which are responsible for this binding, and can show actually indeed if they mutate whether this action is there, and then this is more confirmation to whatever we are proposing. So I will conclude here. So what we have shown, the post-fusion coronary HPM model and validated. It's a good working model. People can take this model and use it for many other studies. At least 3, or we say more than 2 GP41 necessary to mediate this fusion to the host cell membrane. And very importantly, that the stock energy barrier, free energy barrier is around 10 to 12 kVt. And we showed that the PAMM and SPL, 2 variant of the dendrimer, they can significantly destabilize this GP120 CD4 binding, which may prevent the viral entry. And thanks for your attention. So I'll leave it here and take up any further questions.
Thanks, Prabal, for the very nice talk. And any questions from anybody? We had one in the chat box which we have Prabal has answered. If you have questions, just unmute. Just unmute and ask.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. I have a question about this trimer cooperative association of the interaction of the trimers.
Okay. Yeah, tell me.
So I cannot understand the how these interactions are occurring at large distance. So like in 9 nanometers. So
yeah. So you see there
is it hydrogen bond or electrostatic bond? So
yes. So there are, everything is there, hydrogen bond, electrostatics, and remember that the underlying the bilayer matrix. So it's a very, very complex interaction, and that's mediating through these actually. So it's all kind of interactions present. Water is there, ions are there, hydrogen bond is there, electrostatic interaction, everything is present.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other question?
Let me have this movie played. I like this movie. So that previous question, actually electrostatic interaction is long range there, but here it's a really fine-tuned interaction emerging from all of these interactions.
Hello. Then, sir, we can say that all the time scales in the simulation are equivalent to the actual time scales happening.
Yes, yes. They are actually. So when I am talking about nanosecond, microsecond, they are actual real time scale.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a challenge. That's why you see that if I did the same simulation in a fully atomistic than the coarse grain, then I would not have able to access this microsecond. I would have been limited in most cases, nanoseconds, hundreds of nanosecond time scale. So yeah, so these are real time scale.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And this real time scale come because I am solving Newton's equation of motion, where I am evolving the time evolution of the position and velocities, and the units are in real units.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone?
Sir, I have another question. So, can you measure the surface tension of the membranes using these simulations?
Yes, one can. So there are various ways one can measure surface tension. So one easy way or the conventional way will be what is called a Kirkwood-Watt formalism. So what you can do, you can calculate the stress difference between the tangential, meaning the in-plane stress and the out-of-plane stress, and calculate the difference between stress and integrate over this thickness. So that will give you the surface tension. One can calculate that. We do it in other context. One can calculate the surface tension. Yes.
Okay.
See, if you have a homogeneous liquid, no interface, the normal and tangential stress are the same, correct? So there is no surface tension. As soon as you have an interface, you have two different materials. So here is a bilayer and here is the water phase, for example. So there was stress in this direction versus stress in the normal will be different. And if you take the difference and integrate, you will get the surface tension. Yes, you can calculate.
Sir, which softwares were used for the MD simulation? Sorry
So
to
there are,
ask again. I missed it.
Yeah, so for example, the one it's visible like this fusion part, you see that it was we are going for microseconds. So here we use GROMACS, but for the later part with dendrimer and the spooling, we did it using AMBER, NAMD. So it depends on what exactly we're looking for and what force field we are using, compatibility. So it's a combination of GROMACS, AMBER, NAMD.
So how do we know, like, exactly how do we know where we have to use which one, GROMACS or AMBER or some other?
First thing, your knowledge about which one you are comfortable with. That's the first thing, which you are know more than the other. Your expertise in using a certain software. That's the first criteria. All of them are freely available. A second criteria is that ease of usage in terms of which force field. Like whether if you are going to use the AMBER force field, it may not be so easy to use in GROMACS. And similarly, if you are going to use say OPLS, whether it's very used to use in one of these. So that's what. So these are deciding factor to use a software. So there is no ready-made answer for this. It depends on your expertise in using one and the force field you are going to use and the available computational resource. Many of these, for example, GRUMACS is known to be very fast compared to others when you are running in GPU. So if you have a GPU accelerated machines, then you will prefer that. So it's a combination of all of these. And when I was, many people may not be comfortable with this language force field. So when I say force field, I'm talking about this equilibrium bond length, equilibrium angle, and this force constant for each of the interatomic in a molecule, the interatomic distance, all of this. So these are constitute what is called a force field for each species of atoms. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
See the simulation, just since you raised this, there's no further comments yet. In the simulation, it's rather easy. It's a computer will do for you. So in this whole thing, two things are complicated. To get the initial model is like when experimentalists want to do an experiment, they need to have good sample, correct? Unless they have a good sample, they cannot start the experiment. And not a good quality experiment, the quality of sample is bad. It's same here, the initial model, that is what the key thing. Unless you have the initial model, you cannot start the simulation. So in this case, for example, initial model for GP41, initial model for GP120, initial model for dendrimer. When I say model, meaning the 3D conformation of those macromolecules. So that is what is a very big challenge in many of these. Unless you have those, then you cannot even start simulating.
Like for example, DNA, there too we have some this kind of potential, the Lennard-Jones potential, and there are similar equations in that too. So
sure.
we'll be, so using GRUMACS or AMBER will work.
You can do that, yeah. So the force,
thank you.
The forces, they are similar except the what are the atomic species. Depending on that, the equilibrium bond, distance, angle, dihedral, they may change. So that's the only difference.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions from anybody else.
So there is this chat which I have already responded, but maybe I'll tell a little more. This time scales, natural time scales. This is Nehal Mathur. See, in the simulation, I did not go into the simulation detail. So we are solving equation of motion, Newton numerically. Okay, so you have integration. So when you are integrating, you have a time step of integration. So in this time step, the normal time step normally we are using is femtoseconds. Again, why I can give you a big answer, but this is normally bounded by the fastest time scale in your motion. So normally in molecular system, the hydrogen bond motions, they are very fast. They are femtosecond time scale. So then if you are going to keep that, so that time scale is in a femtosecond time scale. So if you want to keep that also intact in your system, so your integration time step is of the order of that. So the time step in integration is normally 1 femtosecond to 2 femtoseconds. Okay, and in fact one can show actually that if you have larger time scale time step, then the energy conservation and all of these is an issue. So with that 1 femtosecond time scale, when you are revolving your system for million of steps, then you can see whether it's a nanosecond or microsecond time scale. So this is a natural time unit, a real time unit. Okay.
So we can scale it down according to the software requirements.
No, you cannot scale it down. That's what I'm trying to say, that the fastest motion time scale in your system, you have to identify. If you freeze all the hydrogens, or if you say I have a united atom, I will not treat hydrogens in my system, then you are not limited by 1 microsecond, 1 femtosecond time step. You can increase your time step to 5 femtoseconds, for example, because you have freeze the motions of all hydrogens. So then your time scale the time step of integration can be 5 femtoseconds. And if you don't have a molecular system where the bond vibration, when I'm telling this bond vibration, they are very fast. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't have all of this, so if you have atomic system, say the monatomic system, then you don't have all these bond vibration, angle vibration. Then your integration time step can be picosecond. Okay.
Okay.
Integration time.
Thank you.
But then with that, if you are like going for several thousand of time step, then that will give you the total time you have access while doing this simulation.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from anyone else? If not, let us thank Probal once again for a very nice and nice talk. And